We can start. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the UNESCO Chair in Cultural Policy and Management at the University of Arts Belgrade, and as the head of the UNESCO Chair, I would like to warmly welcome you to the conference, Another Art World, Manifestations and Conditions of Equity in Visual Arts. We will have more than 60 participants coming from all over the world, from Australia, China, Russia, and Turkey, the Balkan region and Central Europe, to Scandinavia, UK, USA, and Mexico. And I would like to thank you all so much for sharing your research and experience and for participating in the conference program today and tomorrow. Our idea with the conference was to give a greater support to the emerging academic and professional discourse that critically reflects on neoliberal values in arts. In the current conditions where only privileged artists can live from their work and only privileged buyers can buy quality artworks, we wanted to stress the importance of promoting the concept of equity in arts. Equity in terms of decision-making, creating, producing, participating in the artistic field. And therefore, some of the key notions of the conference are self-management, horizontal organization, shared leadership, co-creation, direct and radical democracy, alternative economic approaches, cooperatives. The conference is especially important for us, for the field of cultural policy and management, for the UNESCO Chair in Cultural Policy, because it widens the scope of the academic research in the field of cultural policy, inviting scholars and also practitioners to think, produce, and implement alternative models of organizing the cultural and artistic field. Because when we think of cultural policy and cultural management, we usually think of vertical organization. This is why the topic of another art world, an alternative art world, is introduced in the title. So we can ask ourselves, would it be realistic that by changing the social and economic relations in the art world, we could impact the wider society? So let us reflect on that question during the conference and afterwards. In the spirit of openness and sharing, the conference will be streamed on YouTube and all panel sessions will be recorded and available online after the conference. We will also publish the collection of papers presented in the conference next year. And today we will start with the topics of collective creativity and radical imaginations. A radical imagination, which are notions that suggest that only collectives working in synergy and representing the value of equity can help social transformation. The lecture will be given by Irena Ristic, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Arts Belgrade, whose academic and professional work is dedicated to promotion of collective creativity and horizontal organization in arts and beyond. So Irena, I'm now giving you the floor. Sorry, and just one more information for those who want to listen the lecture in Serbian, you can click the interpretation button and then the Russian language. So Irena, please start.
Okay, good morning. Today I will refer to the results of different studies from the fields of psychology and political philosophy and theory. But I will not mention all the authors during the lecture. So if you are interested to know more about these studies, you can contact me afterward, and the list of references will be available in the proceeding. So maybe we can start now. According to the Castoriadis, society is engaged in the ongoing process of self-creation, and its institutions are built through a form of social creativity, which he calls radical imagination. This creativity is uncausal, emerges ex nihilo, and precedes distinctions of the real and the fictive. But it is conditioned by relations and originates in the dynamic field of imaginary meanings that guarantees the self-articulation of society. Radical imagination is inherent in humans, analogs to the social imaginary, and it is major driving force behind social flows. According to Castoriadis, I quote, "There is no confrontation between the individual and society. The individual is a social creation, as she or he already makes an institution and creates a meaning." So shortly, radical imagination is that force of self-creation, force of self-articulation of the society. And it is opposite to the shield of heteronomy. Castoriadis advocates the project of individual and collective autonomy, which underlies a free society in which all citizens have equal opportunity to participate in its creation. The goal is to remove the gap between states as the independent mechanism and society by creating a real political community, a social group that is able to govern itself. However, the range of imaginary meanings in our liberal oligarchies seems to be extremely narrowed, and the effects of radical imaginations are recognized only in hints, as a kind of revolt, as the voices of dissents originating from the micro collectives, partly from the contemporary artists and cultural operators. They are systematically marginalized. Yes, they are. Although they persist in the
Mlađi istrajavaju u pretresu nametnutih paradigmi. One opstaju kao prostor ispoljavanja i proizvodnje društvenosti.
Open plateau of self-determination, while the commoning becomes a motor of subextraction and the stronghold of radical imagination that enables changes. This is the reason why we will focus today to the artistic collectives, in which the practice of commoning, organized by egalitarian principles, becomes an alternative mode of social reproduction. In addition, artists engaged in commoning are frequently and intentionally involved in imaginative work. Their joint action in a non-institutional framework provide an opportunity to examine the paths of radical imagination on two levels. Firstly, by following the principles of collective creativity, which operates through different forms of artistic and socio-cultural production, systematically targeting the development of social imaginaries. Secondly, by creating a collective based on the imaginary constructs aimed at the production of sociability itself, which are evolved and tested through practices. Of course, these are neither destinational paths nor linear ones. The very creation of a collective is based on the prerogative of collective creativity, as well as the principles of joint work during the creative process are conditioned by the structure and dynamics of the collective. So this is a huge topic indeed. So today I speak only about first part, about conditions of collective creativity as the basis to understand more extensive processes of creative a collective. Is it too fast, Milan, for translation?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. In many ways, collective creativity differs
Kolektivna kreativnost razlikuje se od individualne, najpre zato što se zasniva na pretpostavci emergencije. Ovo izgleda, ovaj termin zvuči maglovito, ali on jasno određuje pretpostavke i ishode kolektivnog stvaralaštva.
Conceptualization can be traced to classical social philosophy, followed by the evolution theory. Emergentism in psychology has its roots in 19th century organicism. That is the theory that the organism, or let's say holiness, is different from the sum of its parts, and that depends on the structural arrangement and mutual relations, just as society formed and integrated unity similar to a living organism. After World War I, almost all presumptions of emergence had been formulated and described in the work of so-called British emergentists. According to their work, emergence is a process that occurs through time. When aggregates of basic entities attain a certain level of structural complexity, properties of the higher level entities emerge. But they emerge only when the appropriate lower level material conditions are present. Material conditions, that is important. What emerge are novel, unpredictable, and irreducible to properties of their lower level parts. Even thought they're determined by those parts and some new pattern of relatedness which operates by the new rule. This, we can say, new reality emerges from the activities of the previous stage as a result of the interaction of what is arisen and the environment in which the process takes place. So, according to them, and consequently, the very creative synthesis within the collective act can be defined as the process of the emergence of something novel and valuable toward the needs of the society where it takes place. Unfortunately, some sweet little myths about commoning are proliferated during the last 10 years, followed by the surplus of romanticization and the pursuit of the ideal without inquire of the material conditions of emergence is the prerogative of joint work. And we can say that they are really worth unmasking. The first myth about commoning is that everything in collective is easy and nice. To be honest, it is not easy at all. Mostly nothing works, especially within artistic and activist practices. There is no collective that is fully functional. As Stina Nyberg well noticed, it is not a matter of dynamics, but of the starting point itself. Assuming that a group is functional from its outset and only later falls into some kind of dysfunction is completely wrong, like every sweetie delusion which needs to be left behind. Every group is dysfunctional in its very formation, unfortunately. The risk is founded in the ambition. Commoning based on egalitarian model bears the problem which should not be diminished. Egalitarity does not delete our differences. In spite of all difficulties, they're the asset and not the ballast. To have them and to preserve them is the first requirement of collective creativity. It is confirmed in the research. Heterogeneous collectives are far more creative than homogeneous ones. True, in the latter case, people recognize one another a bit more quickly, understand one another more easily, connect more strongly. Enthusiasm dominates. So joint work can bring certain pleasure, but with modest reach and mostly minor creative performance. This is because full homogeneity within a collective, no matter how much the atmosphere is pleasant, reduces the scope of imaginative work directed to finding new ideas. Explorative process is modest. It ends before it truly begins. Critical thinking is reduced, and the initial ideas are quickly accepted even before some unusual and original ideas emerge at all. Absence of emergence gives way to a phenomena called group thinking, which results in premature consensus and in completely negligible product of joint work. Fortunately, we don't work in uniform collectives. Completely uniform artistic and activist collectives are really rare. But we have other peripetειas. They derive exactly from the heterogenic structure, which is in the same time the precondition of collective creativity. Of course, we need to keep in mind that diversity is the issue of quality more than the issue of quantity. For example, when referring to clear and explicit features like age, appearance, skin color, or language, effects of diversity can be strong, but only during formative phase. Members more easily identify with like-minded, which may lead to temporary fragmentation that is seldom relevant for collective creativity. Far more important are the differences related to implicit features, like education, like values, aesthetic preference, or certain personality traits. The cognitive diversity is particularly important for collective creativity. The encounter of different cognitive styles brings very intensive explorative and generative processes, followed by deeper elaboration and evaluation. It is very simple. During creative process, somebody proposes an idea which has never occurred before. And the plenty of associations, concepts, and imaginative constructs burst out from different cognitive pockets, arising from the combinatory function that is active already at the individual level. This is, however, only the beginning. As cognitive styles leads the person along the beaten track in perception and processing of information, the scope of ideation at the individual level can be limited. In collective process, borders become porous. The ideas of others lead to activation of previously acquired knowledge in a slightly different way than usual. Then it leads to the flow of thought within semantic domain and generation of new ideas which would never be achieved without specific cognitive stimulation arising from collective process. This way, the ideas of others can wake us up in a creative sense and shake the cognitive patterns. But not everything is so smooth. Sometimes the ideas of others can be a kind of noise, because cognitive interference appears when ideas of others disturb our ideation, ideation at the individual level. In order to emergent process to happen, and therefore for collective to achieve something further, more complex and creative than the sum of all individual contribution might be, cognitive stimulation must be stronger than the noise. Of course, before considering how these two forces are competing during the entire process, they first have to appear. Is it too fast, Milan?
No, no, it's okay.
Okay. So the cognitive stimulation within the process, heterogenic structure is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. Cognitive diversity needs to be expressed. The second condition of collective creativity is active participation. Those who participate in the process should openly express their opinions, ideas, even skepticism. Key differences in the collective should be seen and heard. Active and symmetrical participation in joint work is necessary, and it makes dynamics quite complex. When people freely express their ideas and thoughts, differences become emphasized. So it is not always easy to understand one another or get connected. You could expect more collisions. You could expect lower level of cohesion and less identification. Different voices are confronting, not always agreeing, which is ideal for a dissonance. Thus, we are arriving to the second myth about the commoning. Seemingly, it is aimed at consensus, and such manner of decision-making is almost fetishized. That longing is partly justified, but it is also equally sentimental. In fact, joint work has no place for consensus. Only the dissensus counts. It occurs upon activation of differences in implicit features of those involved, so diversity is clearly expressed. Dissensus is important because it brings far richer creative flows in collective. It enables the exploration and construction of the new realities with extensive generative processes, deeper elaboration, and less errors. According to the research, collective decisions are stronger and braver. They require more time, of course. The procedure is not closed quickly, and it is not aspiring toward some happy ending, but toward an open system of dynamic meanings as the basis of social imaginaries. In the same time, dissensus guarantees a clarification of ideological position. It sharpens the politicality of the collective due to animosity rather than to closeness. Inner fights find their way of externalization in creative production, so making the sensus the key feature of artistic and direct action. Only when the potential of diversity is expressed, all prerogatives of plurality can be noticed. However, plurality brings also a lot of conflicts. They are threats to trust and feeling of psychological safety. Satisfaction is decreasing, and cognitive patterns become more rigid and narrow than when cooperation is expected. It is wrong, however, to think about all conflicts in the light of destructive outcomes. For example, the task-focused conflict encourage creative production and lead to more original and more complex outcomes. See, still, it is quite questionable whether these constructive conflicts, which are the immediate expression of dissensus, can be completely isolated from all others which could be destructive. Particularly delicate are those conflicts related to personal frustration or distribution of roles and responsibility, or relations which arouse beyond the creative frame. And there is no simple answer here. Conflicts are dynamic situations which escape control and require specific methods to be resolved. On dissensus here, we speak in the context of the action itself, deriving from the diversity of implicit features, but without putting the very concept of diversity on pedestal, particularly not when it is used as a means of ideological defocusing in neoliberal agendas. Such was the case with the concept of cultural diversity. Besides, not every diversity is in service of collective creativity. For example, differences in status, in hierarchic structures express disparity and not variety, and bring nothing good to collective creativity. The same case is with differences in the level and kind of motivation, for example. Even cognitive diversity can overcome the collective's resources, leading to dissensus with a destructive outcome. Such situations mostly occur in collision of values or political aspiration. So the issue of ideological consistency can be critical when faced with the requirement of plurality. I think that whole conference can be focused only on this issue. In addition, tensions can be stronger when affecting a higher number of people. The bigger the collective, the bigger the risk. And in the same time, and almost paradoxically, it has been proven that true plurality brings much more creative results. There is no dangers of so-called tyranny of the majority, or, for example, so-called organizational silence, or some other demons of conformism which inhibit creative production. Still, other difficulties may emerge. For example, joint work can bring the fall of motivation and diffusions of responsibility due to the feeling that individual contribution will not be useful or gratified. This leads to the phenomena of social loafing, which is colloquially known as free riding. I'm sure that you feel it sometimes. Creativity decreases because the processes...
Puštanja. Kreativnost se smanjuje jer su procesi već smanjeni na manji broj ukrštanja, proporcionalno nedostatku aktivnog učešća i spremnosti ljudi da preuzmu odgovornost i uključe se u zajednički rad. Isto kao što je aktivna participacija uslov za mobilizaciju kognitivnog diverziteta, ključno je određena klima, postojanje.
Climate is the third and might be the key condition of collective creativity. It refers to general atmosphere evolved from the interpersonal relations. For example, if competition dominates the collective and fear of error frames the entire process, outcomes are quite modest. Generative processes are inhibited due to anxiety and the lack of spontaneity, which is necessary as a catalyst of ideation. On the contrary, if relations are transparent, if communication is open, information available to everyone without latent forms of practicing power, if climate of trust and mutual support prevails and spontaneous creative expression is encouraged, we can expect collaboration grounded in psychological safety and resulting in a high level of collective creativity. Here, the paradox is quite evident. It is quite obvious. How to preserve trust in dynamic, dissensus-based production of meanings in situation of actual danger of conflict, in situation of in some situation which could be even destructive. It is not easy at all, but a high level of trust and support is indeed the condition sine qua non, which must be repeated always and always again. The climate which enables the active participation of all with a clear focus on task facilitates the emergence of dissensus, but the risk that dissensus can get out of control and escalate in aggressive conflict. Thereby, only a high level of trust, which brings the feeling of safety to everyone, enables dissensus to appear and to be directed toward the creative synthesis. Climate also affects the development of two main dimensions of collective creativity: novelty and coherence. Novelty, we can define novelty as it refers to expression of ideas which anybody in process can offer as response to heuristic task. And coherence expresses the readiness of participants to take their cues from ideas of others or from emerging constructs. So it is our ability to build on the ideas of others. Both dimensions must be highly expressed in order for collective creativity to progress. For ideas to be generated and then stimulate the creation of new and the common ones, a certain level of spontaneity is required, directly depending on climate within the collective, on mutual trust and support. In doing so, the exchange of ideas can be very intensive, as the novelty brought by one or by someone, by everyone, brings cognitive stimulation to others, although it may disturb the process by undermining the flows of imaginative work. New elements must be integrated in the function of development of coherent joint creation. Building on ideas of others and mutuality are necessary presumption for cognitive stimulation in the process to prevail over noises and achieve a creative synthesis. Collective performance depends on social sensitivity. Research confirmed that. And it is conditioned by the level of interpersonal reactivity, particularly by dimension of empathic concern, which is far more important than individual creative capacity of each participant. So it is easy to conclude. Only when the feeling of trust and support dominates and people in the collective feel safe, the live gathering is possible to be achieved through creative synthesis, in which every idea, no matter how novel, is built of the previous ones, relying on mutuality and searching for the path of integration. Climate is the one which provides the appearance of dissensus, and in the same time, a kind of victory of cognitive stimulation over any kind of noise. And vice versa, the arousal brought by the novelty developed the sense of community, and even some kind of conspiracy on which artists gladly testify, especially performing artists, when recognize some kind of surrogate of family. It is here, it is important to underline that the climate here has a role of moderator variabile. as it enables the diversity through active participation to be expressed in the census and collective creativity to be really achieved. Whether the census shall result in high level of novelty and coherence, or whether it inhibit the original ideas and brought some kind of motivational declining, depends on climate which is created by the collective. At broader sense, the balance of novelty and coherence in collective act is the analogy and probably expression of dialectic tension between the independency on one side, independency or tendency for authentic expression, and on the other side for bonding, for mutuality and gathering. Finally, it remains indisputable that the quality of relations defines the emergence of collective outcome, non-reducible to the set of singular contribution. Thus, we arrive to the third myth on commoning. Third myth of commoning. Collective does not delete singularity. It is insisted by the contemporary artists. And it does not, certainly. We are actualizing ourselves through otherness, but that is not a given and undeniable premise. It is only the potential, and first of all, it is the space of inner battles. Therefore, the actualization of singularity in collective process during imaginative work might be the major issue of commoning. The important role in this process is played by the climate, which depends on the manner in which collective is created and recreated over and over again, in dialectic tensions between egalitarity and hierarchy, between emergence and stagnation, between plurality and consistency, parallel with sharpening of ideological positions and practices. In this transposition from the level of material to the level of social production, the tools of self-reflection can be crucial, tools of reflection and self-reflection. The method which offer possibility of developing certain climate and serve for elaboration of joint work. Tools of self-reflection is equally a guardian of egalitarity and of emergence. It gives vitality to practice, openness, dynamics. It gives understanding of external pressure and also recognition of invisible forms of censorship. Obstruction of sociability, control of contents and action which capitalist structure realize through different forms of blackmail and through strong effects of self-censorship and at psychodynamic level can be defeated only with tools of self-reflection. Personal experience are shared in this kind of method. Concerns becomes aspiration, and solidarity is empowered through continuous production of affective meaning, which is the guarantee for creating of collective. And when a high level of trust is established, it opens space for detabooization, reconsideration of our own positions, awareness, and even a kind of personal dissensus, which underlies necessary and always present need for repolitization of practices. In this way, method become tool of meta-censorship and subvert systemic perpetuation, while the processuality evident in the dynamics of the social imaginary guarantees the openness of the community to change, provided that the imagination is not reduced to reactive mental representation. This becomes the drive of practice, the material manifestation of certain relations. They're testing in reality. They're growing in and simultaneous performing on the path toward new forms of collectivity and perhaps collective autonomy. Any question?
We have one question from someone called Mutuinino.
Mariana has the question, or she is just, Mariana has a question.
Okay, let's hear her.
Mariana.
Mariana.
Thank you, Irena, for this great keynote. I really enjoyed your text, your presentation, and I wanted to ask you which cases you have used for this text, or what are the cases that all this is based on. I suppose it will be, of course, in the text later on, but maybe you can share with us this kind of information. Thank you.
This text, this keynote is not based on the case studies. This is mostly based on the empirical studies from the field of collective creativity and from the experiments that are realized from the group of authors like Milliken, Listad. It is really huge amount of empirical studies that try to map different factors of collective creativity. It is the reason why I said on the beginning that I will not mention all authors, because there are too many authors here. This is not based on case study. It is more based on the experimental research from the field of collective creativity studies. Almost all of these aspects has huge amounts of research, really. I mean, research about heterogeneity, research about cognitive diversity, research about collective decision. It is really huge amount of experimental studies. So it will be available in the list of bibliography. I didn't use specific case studies. I found support in empirical studies from the field of psychology and socio-psychological research.
Okay, thank you, Irena. Mariana, do you want to?
Theoretically, in theory, you could recognize Castoriadis, Stina Nyberg, you could recognize Rancière, I suppose, with the concept of dissensus, but in empirical side, it is really huge amounts of authors. So I will give you the list of all references.
Mariana, is it okay, or you have another question to ask? Or I can ask a question from Danilo Prnjat, whose internet is not going so well, so I'm gonna read it. He asked, how do you imagine dissensus through constructive conflict in a situation of conflict based on different class interests and class aspirations? Is a crash of dissensus inevitable here?
Crash of dissensus. I mean, dissensus always can be crashed totally.
But he is insisting on the question of class.
I understood. Yes, it is in a matter of fact matter or that is a issue of process. I don't think that we can speak about something which is just a short-term encounter with someone. I think that the census, we need to think about potentiality of the census in some long-term process, in more encounters, in more continuous, ongoing encounters where we can elaborate some issues. So I'm sure that one encounter cannot resolve one dissensus, one emerging of one dissensus cannot be resolved within one term. I think it is long-term process. So let's say that let's say like this, we need to try to kako se kaže izdržati, sustain, ne, we need to persist in some situation of extreme anxiety during the potential encounter, which is long-term encounter. And then maybe from that dissensus, we can develop a new level of affective meanings. So I don't think that we can solve that within one encounter. I think it is maybe a long-term task. And the role of small communities, the role of small initiative, gathering initiative is a kind of emancipation of the idea of commoning, which can then try to make a kind of bridging related to the class struggle. I'm not sure if I explain well.
Then Danilo, do you want to react or not?
I don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. I think. Thank you. Thank you, Irena, for your explanation.
Okay, we have a question from Kia. Kia, please. Kia had a question. I have it here, but maybe she can pose it herself. If not,
yes.
Okay.
Okay. I would like to ask what is except the empathic care in the process of collectives is possible to develop trust inside of the collective, and I would connect it also with the fear of stealing ideas and jealousy, which is maybe the banal part of this question, but it's very often present in the processes of collectives.
How to handle this kind of conflict? Do you ask me that, or
how to develop trust except of empathic care inside of the collective, and how to care about this fear from stealing ideas.
Yes, I understand. In a matter of fact, empathic concern is just one sub-dimension of interpersonal reactivity, which is crucial for development of trust and this kind of climate of trust and collaboration. So it is quite important factor in it. We have made here in Belgrade some experiment related trying to explore correlation between collective creativity and empathic concern. I can share with you later, but it is the factor. It is also something which needs to be developed. How? I think we don't have enough time to explore a bit more. I think that methodological techniques of reflection and self-reflection are crucial in this at this point. When I said tools of self-reflection, I think different formats that collective can create itself. It could be a well-known format like different dialogical format, plenum, action technique based at the psychodynamic heritage, or some other kind of dialogical encounters, which is as a base for development, as a base of persisting dissensus and trying to look for some new paths of commoning. So I think that it is really neglected in contemporary artistic collectives and activist collectives. Nobody has a time for that. We are all the time overwhelmed with project activities or direct actions, and nobody really think about mechanism of reflection and self-reflection. And in the matter of fact, that are very concrete tools that can make collectives more strong, more resilient toward external pressure, and more vital inside. And main goals is in the fact development of different kind of interpersonal reactivity, especially empathic concern and solidarity.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask you if is it a necessary condition that people working in a collective who want to function on those principles that you've been describing, is it necessary that they're all more or less politically in sync, so that they have similar political and ideological backgrounds?
It is a huge question. I mentioned that we need one special conference related to that dialectic tension between plurality and ideological consistency. I think also that it is the matter of practice, because we have one, maybe 2 years ago, we had one research where we asked a group of artists and activists about this issue, about how they handle that conflict between political stability, needs for political stability within collective, and needs for plurality. And somehow, first we had very different assessment of power of ideological consistency and the purpose of ideological consistency. And what was the output of that dialogues was that, in a matter of fact, issue of ideological consistency maybe is the major manifestation of producing the meaning on the level of social imaginary, in a way that everything can happen via practices. If we are doing something, it is more important than to speculate about our ideological positions. And then we can bridge that dialectical tension via practices. If we start to really change our our relations, our working relations, our social relations, our interpersonal relations. If we are really work actively and directly on the changing of these relations, we can gain certain ideological consistency without necessary speculation about that, because output of that dialogues was that speculation make the noises between the peoples. When we speak too much about our ideological positions, then we have discrepancy and conflicts that we cannot overcome. But if we are working on that without too many, without simplification, in a matter of fact, when we speculate something, when we work really with the people, if we believe in self-government, how do you say samoupravljanje, kako se prevodi?
Self-management.
Self-management. I don't like that word self-management, because in management,
self-governance.
Self-government, if we really want to work on self-government of some collectives, then we need to work that. We need to produce that relation, and it is not necessary to just declare them.
Okay. Okay, we have a last question from Maria. Maria, can you ask the question? Okay. Just a second. She's gonna. Maria, you're unmuted, so you can ask. Or if not.
I have a comment, please.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, this is Teemu Mäki from Finland. I have a comment about how much internal disagreements can a collective take. My experience is that that collective can take huge amounts of internal disagreements or conflicts. A practical example would be that I've worked in collectives where the members have not agreed, for example, on 3 topics, that most of the members of the collective have been socialists, but not everybody. And some members have been religious, Muslims or Christians, but some atheists. And some members of the collective have been, how would I say, conservative about gender. So they believe in the binary gender system. But some members of the same collective have been people of third gender. And in spite of this, the collective can work. But of course, it's very individual how long can a collective keep on working if there are this kind of major disagreements within the collective. I'll also put in a link in the chat box. It's a link to a collective painting that a group of teenagers made a long time ago under my supervision. And this was an informative example of the disagreement within a collective, because in this collective painting, the teenagers had a major disagreement, since some of the members were really conservative Christians who believe that marriage is only possible between a woman and a man and so on and so forth. But in this case, majority in the collective were, how would I say, non-binary or lesbian radicals who hate the idea, traditional idea of the marriage. And in spite of this, we were able to work together and make this kind of painting. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we were asked if there is time for another question. Yes, please, just briefly, and then we're gonna have a pause. Goran, Vishnya.
Hello, thank you, Irena, for a great keynote. One thing came to my mind as we discussed this, especially during the questions session, and that is in how fixed terms are we thinking about a collective? Because it seems that we are kind of problematizing and pluralizing all the things except the kind of porosity of the collective or changeability of the collective. So it seems that it is okay for the people to come in, but is it okay for the collective to be totally transformed as it goes? And it is the methods that keep actually the kind of core of the collective, not the members. Like how do you think about those things?
Thank you, Vishnya. Irena, please just briefly and...
Briefly, these are some additional really conditions of creating a collective. We just start this. In a matter of fact, the issue of emergence is, principle of emergence required some sub-principles as openness, flexibility in functioning, as a tools of auto-reflection, exchanging of knowledge, etc., etc. And all of these sub-principles, we can say, are telling us that collective is changing all the time. I mean, it is the only that is, in a matter of fact, final requirement of development. There is no base for any kind of really activistic approach without that changing. Even if it is very hard to tolerate, very hard to persist in that. In a matter of fact, principle of openness, flexibility, permeability of borders, openness to exchange, etc., etc. Finished. Mute yourself.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
That is really a kind of mandatory requirement, because that is that dialectical tension between emergence and stagnation, which is always in the function of a retrograde process. If we don't change the collective, we don't have anything related to activism, anything related with artistic thinking toward changing the society. It is really mandatory.
Thank you, Irena, for giving some basic and useful, not basic, but general guidance to building collectives. I'm sure that there are concrete mechanisms of dealing with concrete issues while working in collectives, but maybe that will be described in your paper. We will have a break now, and afterwards a panel session which will be dedicated to the topic of self-management and self-governance of cultural and artistic organizations. So please follow the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.